So now this raises a really interesting question. If animals do have culture, what makes us different? What makes our form of culture different to other animals? Why don't other animals read or write or use videos to teach each other? What makes us so different? And here we have to return to a concept that we had mentioned already a number of times, which is the idea of cumulative culture, the ratchet effect. So the ability to increase the complexity of cultural traits over time, and the importance that, and we will come back to that, the importance that high fidelity, so highly accurate learning processes play a role. And the important thing here for a ratchet to work is actually you have to modify the cultural trait and increase the complexity or efficiency over time. So it's not just the fact that you learn a behavior, but you need to make that behavior more sophisticated, more complex, or more efficient over time, to the extent that at some stage it will be too difficult to unravel, to re-engineer everything from the end product, and no single individual would be able to invent that more complex product down an evolutionary timeline. Right? So this is really the key idea of the ratchet effect, that it becomes more complex and the product or the cultural innovative trait could not be designed or invented by any single individual from scratch. But animals do have complex behavior or even tools. In the case, for example, the classic example are Caledonian crows. They create tools, and they have an amazing range of tools available to solve certain problems. And so we have to differentiate between what is called accumulation versus cumulative culture. So animals have tools and have repertoires that can increase. Right? So we have additional knowledge, behavioral patterns that can be added to a repertoire, but in themselves they're typically relatively simple and don't increase much in complexity. A bit more on that later on. On the other hand, cumulative culture basically means there's modification and over multiple transmission episodes. So over time, we increase the complexity and efficiency of the cultural trait, right? So the end product is much more complex than what you've immediately started or first started off with. Right? So this is an important distinction. Accumulation in animal cultures is very common, but there's very little evidence or very limited evidence of cumulative culture. And a lot of people, like Tomasello, have actually argued cumulative culture is what makes human culture different. People have studied this in a number of different ways. One are so-called transmission chains, like something like the telephone system, where people would pass information across time and across different generations on, and so we can study how accurate information is being passed on and how it changes over time, whether it becomes more complex over time. And there are also so-called replacement studies or micro-societies, where you have a group of individuals that start off, then in the next generation one of the individuals is being replaced here. So individual A is being replaced and a new individual comes in, and then in the third generation individual B is being replaced and a new individual joins the group. And again, we can see to what extent information stays in a group or becomes more complex over time. So this is what Christine Caldwell and Ailsa Millen and her colleagues have done repeatedly. And I'm just going to give you one example of what I think is a very cool and innovative way of studying or using transmission chains to study cumulative culture.
I'm Christine Caldwell and I'm from the University of Stirling. We've been testing some of the human visitors to living links and presenting them with similar challenges to the ones that are currently being given to some of the monkeys. So we asked people to build a tower from spaghetti and plasticine. We also provide the participants with information about how other individuals have gone about doing this, so we show them photographs of other people's towers. Their goal generally is to build a tower that's as high as they can possibly make it. What that can show us are interesting things about the sort of information that we get from other people and why that's useful, and why culture is useful, why culture might have evolved as, you know, a useful capacity to humans. So what we find is that people that have been able to see the solutions of previous participants do better on this task. The non-human primates show that effect as well, so we find that seeing a skilled demonstrator in the monkeys works for them too, and they tend to perform better. But what we can find in the human participants, which seems to be a bit more elusive in the non-human primates, is this cumulative effect of increasing performance over kind of a chain of learners. People that can see the solutions of people that have seen previous solutions themselves do even better. So the sort of cumulative progress in terms of how well people do on this task. So it shows that in human populations, knowledge can kind of accumulate and be passed down, and that's really key to why culture is actually so adaptive for us. One of the reasons that we're...
Right, okay, I'll just cut out here. And yeah, it's really the key idea that human culture allows us to accumulate this information over generations and increase the complexity of the final product. This has been shown again and again in studies by Caldwell and others, where you can see, for example, with these paper planes, so people were shown different ways of folding these little paper planes, and then over generations the planes actually became more efficient in traveling longer distances, or with the spaghetti towers they became higher. Right, so this shows the power of human cumulative culture. And so Dean and others define cumulative culture, or set criteria for identifying cumulative culture in two ways. So behavior has to be socially learned. It's not just some genetic or environmental factor that drives a specific behavior, which is often very important to rule out in animals, because you have often genetic programs or environmental adaptations that are not necessarily socially learned. And there has to be some directional or progressive change over time, so increasing complexity or increasing efficiency over time. And this is, for a long time people have argued, this is actually clearly indicating that most likely it's only humans that can do this. But then a couple years ago, a group of researchers started looking at the efficiency argument and started, of all animals on this planet, studying pigeons. Would you think that pigeons are particularly smart and intelligent? But as you will see in a second, they seem to be able to have some very basic forms of cumulative culture. So what they did is they used these postal pigeons from the good old times, and then what they did is they took these pigeons very far away, a few hundred miles away in the UK, and then released them either alone, so this is the control condition, or in pairs, and then over time they would switch pairs. So what you will have, it's essentially it's a transmission chain experiment. And now what they were tracking is whether these pairs over time became more efficient in finding a faster route back to their home after being released. And what you can see over time is that up here, the pigeons over these generations became more efficient in getting home faster. So they had a increased route efficiency when traveling in pairs compared to when traveling repeatedly alone. And this is, if you use the definition by Dean, this is a clear sign of cumulative culture where over time there's a progression for these individuals to solve a problem with greater efficiency. So of course we can argue or can ask, is this type of behavior actually comparable? Do you think this really captures the essence of cumulative culture in humans? It's a very important question and one that needs to be discussed, but at the minimum level this experiment seems to demonstrate that the idea of cumulative culture has to be pushed back also into the animal kingdom, and potentially other animals are also able to increase the efficiency of problem solving over time. Now the goalposts have shifted somewhat, so like colleagues of Dean, like people in Leyland's group now have argued probably what makes us different is not so much that we have cumulative culture, but that animals have task-specific cumulative culture, whereas humans have what is called task-general cumulative culture. Once we have a cumulative cultural process, humans are very good at solving a multiple number of problems with that. So once we have a hammer, we can start using the hammer for solving all sorts of problems, whereas even if apes develop a hammer, then they will use the hammer only and increase the efficiency of the hammer only for opening, let's say, nuts, but will not use it for other purposes, right? So the major difference might be that we are able to generalize across different types of tasks. And it also raises really interesting questions for future research about the task-specific limits of a species for cultural cumulative culture. So what are the tasks that can be solved by animals, and what are the cognitive kind of underpinnings of that? But it's really interesting research, really interesting questions that at one level show that cumulative culture is something that is unique to humans in our greater complexity, but then on the other hand, it might be that even other animals have basic capacity for cumulative culture.